Okay, hello. Hi, everybody. Hi, I'm back, and today I wanted to talk about pivot points. I am having the realization that I've been in the process of a pivot point this entire year, and I just feel this really strong urge to talk it through so I can understand it, and hopefully this can help you too. So life is filled with pivot points. This is something that I know in my bones. And when I say pivot points, I'm talking about these very specific points of pressure that force you to change course and to reorient yourself on the path of your life. They're fork in the road moments, they're portals, they're mirrors. You become a different person at a pivot point. And these pivot points happen all the time, and they look different for everyone, and they vary in the degree of the pivot as well. So sometimes you'll hit a pivot point and change your course like maybe 12 degrees this way, and other times you hit a pivot point and you have to do an entire 180 and become someone the complete opposite of who you were. And sometimes the pivot point is a whole 360, where it's the case where you might end up exactly right back where you started, but you're not the same person. You have all the knowledge and experience and perspective of having done a complete circle. So even though you're back at the same point, you're just not the same. And sometimes the pivot comes from forces outside of you that are acting upon your life, things that you have no control over, which could be something like political instability or a pandemic. And sometimes it's an internal thing. It's like a shift that starts in your body and reverberates throughout the rest of your life. And sometimes a pivot point is slow and it takes several years before you're able to move in a new direction. And sometimes they're so fast that you blink and you're a new person in a new life, just like that. The core of a pivot point is some kind of transformation that results in a shift of your set course. And because of the way that time works and that we can only ever perceive it as mostly moving forward, I see life as linear in that sense. But it's not just one line. It's infinite lines, infinite possibilities, infinite choices. And every choice is a mini pivot point in itself. But the ones I'm talking about are, the giant, glowing, luminescent pivot points, which are always the most painful ones. There's this crazy, motorcycle brigade just going on outside the window. I'm sure you guys can hear that. Anyway, so most times this transformation that happens with the pivot point, it comes about from facing some kind of pain or suffering, which kind of sounds like a bummer at first, but it's simply because of the laws of the universe. Change requires friction, and it's much harder for life to be able to generate enough friction through comfort or pleasant emotions, because those are soothing states. They're about tranquility, they're about peace, but suffering is about friction. And not to get all Catholic in this bitch, but this is why suffering is an important part of life, because it's fuel. And actually, when I think about it, the Catholics kind of knew what they were talking about. Yeah, speaking of which, Simone Weil, she has that incredible quote where she says, "We must not wish for the disappearance of our troubles, but for the grace to transform them." And even Carl Jung said that there's no coming to consciousness without pain. And, this is what it's all about. Life is about coming to consciousness. It's about waking the fuck up. And therefore, life is suffering, but it's because life is also change. You can replace life with God, and you can say God is suffering because God is change. And that would also be a true statement as well. It's the pivot points of life that illuminate this truth. And just thinking like this has helped me get through a lot of this year and all the pivoting I've been doing and that's been happening in my life, because Like, I also know that the pain is temporary, even if it might not feel like it in the moment, you know? I think I have a really funny disposition sometimes. It's difficult to describe it because I think I tend to teeter a lot between like total abject melancholy. Oh my God. And then on the other side, I'm like completely hopelessly optimistic and hope-pilled. And I just have these two sides of me that are always, negotiating, and they're always balancing each other out, which is kind of beautiful. It's very Gemini moon coded. Anyway, when it comes to pivot points, I find that the question you're faced with the most in these moments is always, what do I want? This just repeats over and over and over again. What do I want? What do I want? What do I want? What do I want? Like, if you listen really carefully, you can always hear it. It's like, what do I want? What do I want? What do I want? What do I want? And it induces like this trance state that comes upon a person, like where you can't escape the fugue until you make a choice. And this is the universe's way of presenting you with a choice, because at the end of the day, you do have a choice, and that choice is more often than not to either, take a leap, take a chance, make a change, or you can refuse to grow. And sure, you can refuse, but in that refusal, you ultimately prolong the inevitable. And this is why I'm kind of the opinion sometimes that, like, yes, we have free will, but we also kind of have no choice in a way, because it's like, okay, sure, you can refuse the call, but if you refuse, you end up pretty miserable, frustrated, sick, and in pain, and it becomes this prolonged state instead of something temporary. You're just trying to like delay something inevitable, which is change. And I've seen this, with my own eyes in real life. When I was younger, I feel like this was the case with a lot of the adults I knew. Like, for example, like I have an uncle who is completely an alcoholic, and he's been presented with many pivot points to change his life, get himself together. And each and every time he refuses the call, and each and every time, he loses something, and his life becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. And I'm sure the day will come when the choice basically becomes like, your life or alcohol. And who knows what anyone is going to do. And I say this with compassion as well, because I understand being in the grips of addiction and how difficult like psychic emotional pain can be. But I also know that there's a difference between soothing a wound and healing it. The wound is the place where the light enters you. That's Rumi. But yeah, that's why it's always worth it to go into the pain. And there's always moments before the pivot, before the choice, where you're completely disoriented, but kind of electric at the same time. And there's a very palpable feeling of being in limbo, like you're not moving forward or backwards, and you haven't made any decisions or any choices yet, but you're not stuck either. And it feels like you're kind of just floating on nothing, and time is at a standstill. And in quantum mechanics, there's this theory called superposition, which is the idea that multiple states of reality can exist simultaneously, one on top of another at the same time. Now, I'm not like a quantum scientist or anything, but it's basically, the point is like, it's like, for example, okay, say you wake up in the morning, you haven't opened your eyes yet and can't tell if it's a sunny day or a rainy day or a cloudy day or a cold day or hot day, whatever. Superposition theory says that it is all of those days at the same time. It's all existing simultaneously until you open your eyes. And the moment before the pivot, before you make a choice, is like that. Every possibility for how your life can turn out exists at the same time, one on top of the other. And then you choose, and you live the life you've chosen until you reach the next pivot point. And then you choose, and then you live the life you've chosen until you reach the next pivot point, and so on and so on. And it's kind of beautiful when you sit with that, and you think of it that way. So another thing about pivot points is that they require a letting go. And I know, like, I swear I talk about suffering and letting go all the time. Oh my God, like, I can really be really morbid sometimes, seriously. But I don't know, like, I just think that you kind of have to dig into these topics because this is the hard stuff, you know? And I feel like if you can deal with the hard stuff, you can deal with anything. But anyway, pivoting requires a letting go. Once you open your eyes, you cannot be in two places at once. You have to make a choice, and choice excludes, it severs. And in this case, it severs your grasp on the past. It doesn't mean that you forget or that you just cannot relate to anything in your past anymore, but it does mean that you have to let go of your immediate and conscious identification with it. You have to let go of who you thought you were, and you have to make room for whoever it is that you're becoming. You have to make room for the choice that you've made. You know, this can be a really, really hard one because sometimes the letting go has to happen before the new whatever has fully arrived. And this can bring up feelings of emptiness or sadness or feelings like, you know, who am I now? Like, you know, you live a certain way and you take certain things as part of your identity, and letting go of that can be so incredibly hard. Like, God, it can be the hardest thing ever. But when that happens, I bring it back again to that question of what do I want? You know, I enter that trance again and I kind of go from there. It's like Sartre says, existence precedes essence. And when he says that, he's talking about the idea that human beings are not born fixed with a fixed purpose or nature or like way of being, but instead we make ourselves, we become ourselves through our choices throughout our lives. So you don't have to answer the question of who am I, because you're always becoming, and every choice that you make at every pivot point makes you more you. You get what I mean? And you know what, actually, that Sartre quote just reminds me of another quote from Neville Goddard, where he says, the signs always follow, they never precede. I remember the first time I read that, like I literally like underlined that in the book a million times. It's from his book, At Your Command. And basically, when he says the signs always follow, they never precede, it's another way to say that reality becomes through being. You have to live to be. The embodiment comes before the evidence. We make a choice before we see the proof of said choice. So do you get what I'm saying? They're basically saying the same things. And I kind of love that. Like, I love finding these bridges between everything. And, you know, it's basically what I like to do in music and in all the art that I make. Like, I just love finding these bridges between things that you wouldn't think are related, but they are related because everything is related. Everything is bridged. And I'm the bridge maker. Anyway, and speaking of music, I guess you guys will be the first to know, but I'm at a pivot point when it comes to my career and what I want to do with my life and my time. I feel like there's been this shift inside of me as far as, you know, what's resonating within these days, but also externally, the music industry, oh my God. There's something happening in the music industry or going on in the music industry that's really hard to articulate, because it's not just like one thing, it's many things working together at once. And all these things have basically just made me feel like I need to take a step back and reevaluate and maybe come at it from a different angle. Like, it's not that I'm quitting or anything. I haven't made that decision yet, but I am getting like the distinct feeling that I need to take a step back. And when I think about it, I think about how hard I worked this year and how I threw myself, like I threw my whole self into this album, this project. And now I just kind of feel spent and like I don't have enough energy to go on tour for the next 12 months promoting it. And I really do, like, I feel spent just like physically in terms of energy, but also like spiritually. It's like a spiritual exhaustion. I think that maybe I gave what I needed to give, and now I feel like I'm supposed to do something else while, you know, everything kind of figures itself out. Yeah, I don't know. I guess you'll also be the first to know, like, I ended up canceling my European tour for various reasons that, you know, I can get into later. Or, like, if you're following my W Friday Instagram, I'm going to talk about it this week. But I still have a few tour dates this fall. Like, I have 5 shows, mostly in the USA, and one in Mexico City. And then after that, like, I honestly don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. I always hibernate during the winter anyway. And I have a special project that I'm focusing on for this winter, top secret. But after that, I don't know what's going to happen. My eyes are closed and I haven't made the pivot yet, but it's coming and I'm excited. Like, truly, I'm excited to see what happens next. And in the meantime, like, I'm excited to make more of these podcast episodes, talk to you guys, you know. We'll see where all this talking takes me. But yeah, I think that's it for today. I think that's all I wanted to say about pivot points. But if you have any questions, comments, feedback, as usual, just drop a comment and I'll talk to you guys later. I love you. Bye.